From the moment a teenage Jeanne Crain stepped onto an ice rink and captured the title of Miss Pan Pacific, destiny seemed to be guiding her toward the spotlight. Yet this talented skater from Barstow, California, never imagined that a spontaneous screen test with Orson Welles would ignite her lifelong passion for acting, or that she would become one of Hollywood's biggest stars of the 1940s and 50s. Behind her Oscar-nominated performance and the swirl of glamorous parties lay a complex personal story, a marriage tested by scandal, devout religious convictions that shaped her decisions, a beloved pet lioness she struggled to keep, and a private life marked by both triumph and heartbreak. Join us as we uncover the most surprising and little-known details about the remarkable Jeanne Crain. Jeanne Elizabeth Crain was one of those rare Hollywood figures who seemed to combine a wholesome charm with a quietly daring approach to life. Born on May 25, 1925 in Barstow, California, she came into the world as the daughter of George A. Crain and Loretta Carr, both Irish Catholics. George worked as an English teacher, and he relocated the entire family to Inglewood not long after Jeanne's birth, having secured a better teaching position. Their new home on Walnut Avenue offered them a degree of stability, but it did not last forever. In 1934, her parents divorced, and Jeanne, just a young girl at the time, moved with her mother to Van Ness Avenue in Los Angeles. Despite these early disruptions, Jeanne formed an unshakable sense of identity. She retained close ties to her Irish Catholic upbringing, a faith that would later shape some of her most important personal decisions. It was, in many respects, an ordinary beginning for someone who would later be vaulted into stardom. Yet in other ways, even her childhood suggested a life far from typical. While growing up, she discovered the joys of ice skating, an interest that soon blossomed into genuine skill. She achieved recognition for her artistry on the ice, eventually earning the title of Miss Pan Pacific at the Pan Pacific Auditorium in Los Angeles. She also won the title of Miss Long Beach at the age of just 16, a feat that took place while she was still grappling with balancing normal teenage pursuits and a fledgling talent for skating. Though she had a flair for performance, she could not have anticipated that a chance encounter at RKO Studios would make her consider a career in film acting. Legend has it that one day she found herself touring the iconic RKO lot, where she was spontaneously asked to take a screen test with none other than Orson Welles. At the time, he was arguably the most famous filmmaker around, having revolutionized the medium with Citizen Kane and set Hollywood abuzz with his creative approach to cinema. For an unproven teen from an unassuming background, being invited to read for a legendary director was both terrifying and electrifying. The screen test did not lead to a job. Indeed, she failed to impress Welles or the studio sufficiently to get cast in a picture, but it gave her the realization that she wanted to act for the rest of her life. In the aftermath of that audition, she enrolled at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, to study drama, eager to transform what had been a whimsical notion into a serious career plan. The speed of her success was startling. By the time she turned 18, she had secured a minor role with 20th Century Fox, launching the path that would one day make her an Oscar nominee and, for a while, one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. She was often credited simply as Jeanne Crain, though her birth certificate read Jeanne Elizabeth Crain, and it was under that name that she achieved most of her success. A slender brunette with a bright, sunny countenance, she had a clean-cut, girl-next-door aura that Fox found easy to market. Audiences were drawn to the combination of her approachable warmth and something quietly resolute behind her eyes. She had, by all accounts, a delicate beauty, but also a willfulness that showed itself in subtle ways. Whether posing for promotional stills or working on set, she radiated an engaging presence that led to the studio spotlighting her in a variety of roles. Despite this, she never displayed the flamboyant star persona one might have expected of the era's glamour queens, such as Lana Turner or Rita Hayworth. Instead, she projected a kind of modest readiness to adapt, a reflection perhaps of her early years as a newcomer, frequently uprooted and resettled. Her personal life soon became as dramatic as any of her movie roles. In December 1945, just as she was beginning to see her name in press outlets and fashion magazines, she decided to marry Paul Brinkman, often known professionally as Paul Brooks, a contract player at RKO. Brinkman was about 7 years older, and to complicate matters, Jeanne's mother adamantly disapproved of the union. The tension was so profound that mother and daughter became estranged for a period. Yet neither of them was prepared to yield. Jeanne was old enough to decide for herself, and Brinkman equally determined to wed the rising star. They eloped at the Church of the Blessed Sacrament in Beverly Hills, a quiet ceremony that ushered in a marriage that, for many years, would be dogged by rumors and nearly undone by quarrels, yet ultimately survived until Brinkman's death in 2003. A devout Catholic, Jeanne did not believe in divorce. She would later cling to this position even when Brinkman accused her of infidelity or she accused him of spousal abuse. They parted ways on more than one occasion, yet never fully severed ties, reuniting under the shared conviction that their Catholic faith forbade a final dissolution. Their relationship, though, was often tempestuous, each suspecting the other of disloyalty. At one point in the mid-1950s, an interlocutory divorce decree was even granted. Brinkman publicly labeled her accusations wild, irresponsible, and untrue, calling himself shocked by the revelations. Jeanne, for her part, believed that Brinkman was living off her earnings and resented his alleged abuses. The drama was complicated by the presence of Jeanne's mother, whom Brinkman blamed for exacerbating tensions. Yet by the end of 1956, they reached a reconciliation, driven in part by the seriousness with which both took their faith, culminating in a resolution to stay together. Over the years, Brinkman made a successful transition into business, joining an arms manufacturing company as a top executive, thus lightening the financial burdens that might otherwise have fueled conflict. She had a prolific run at 20th Century Fox, starring in 23 films for the studio. In the early to mid-1940s, these included roles that allowed her to perfect a persona of the earnest ingenue. She gained traction in Home in Indiana, 1944, a film that introduced her to wider audiences who found her sweetly winning. She found particular acclaim in State Fair, 1945, a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical in which she showcased the fresh-faced, youthful spirit that made her a darling of Middle America. Critics praised her for exuding honest emotion and an endearing vulnerability. Fans sent in letters by the thousands, remarking upon her relatable quality, not quite the sultry bombshell, not quite the comedic wisecracker, but that luminous in-between. Often overshadowed by bigger stars of the era, she nonetheless persisted, building a career that soared well into the mid-1950s. One of her earliest breakthroughs arrived when she starred in Margie, 1946, a nostalgic teenage comedy set in the 1920s. Portraying a high school girl navigating crushes and adolescent embarrassments, Jeanne elicited squeals of delight from viewers who found her comedic timing surprisingly deft. The film became a commercial success, highlighting her flair for innocence blended with just a hint of teenage irreverence. Another memorable role came in Apartment for Peggy, 1948, starring opposite William Holden. There, she played a young wife who tries to make do in a cramped living space, radiating optimism that endeared her further to post-war American audiences. Yet these projects, for all their popularity, only skimmed the surface of what she could do dramatically. The real turning point in her career and in how critics viewed her occurred in 1949 when she starred as the title character in Pinky. Directed by Elia Kazan and John Ford, the film had a complicated production history leading to directorial changes. Pinky was a light-skinned African-American nurse passing for white in the Deep South. It was a daring storyline for its era, requiring an actress to embody the fear and frustration of a woman who could cross the color line but suffered intense prejudice and inner turmoil. Pinky triggered immediate conversation. Some contemporary commentators criticized the casting of a white actress in a role addressing racial injustice, yet many others praised the film as progressive. Jeanne was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress, losing ultimately to Olivia de Havilland, but the nomination alone elevated her artistic credibility. In interviews, she expressed humility, aware that playing Pinky had challenged her, though in ways the public might not fully appreciate. She was, after all, the sheltered star of gentle musicals and comedies, thrust into a role that demanded grappling with social complexities. This role remains, to many fans, her crowning cinematic achievement. Shortly after Pinky, Jeanne sought to broaden her horizons. Having devoted roughly half a decade to Fox, she felt it was time to experiment with other studios and more mature roles. In the early 1950s, she parted ways with Fox after making 23 films in total for them. She dabbled in work at Warner Brothers, though a long-term synergy never quite formed there. She then signed a contract with Universal Studios, hoping for a better range of roles that might let her explore deeper dramatic or comedic territory, free from the perpetual ingenue constraints. During this phase, she appeared in Take Care of My Little Girl, 1951, a college-set drama about sorority life and identity, and Dangerous Crossing, 1953, a moody thriller about a honeymoon cruise turned nightmarish when the bride's husband vanishes. Though some critics felt these films never matched the intensity or social relevance of Pinky, they showcased her ability to convey tension and fear in more adult storylines. Her personal life, though, overshadowed any veneer of calm, especially as the 1950s unfolded. She and Brinkman started a family, eventually welcoming 7 children into the world. To accommodate her first pregnancy, she took a break from acting for about a year, an unusual step for a rising star in that era, given how studios often pressured actresses to conceal pregnancies or quickly return to set. She was quite open about her desire for a fulfilling family life, even if it meant stepping away from the frantic Hollywood environment temporarily. Yet domestic bliss proved elusive. Rumors circulated that both partners were involved in extramarital affairs. Their arguments reportedly turned vicious, with allegations of physical abuse, drunken spats, or meddling from outside relatives. The Catholic faith that anchored them ironically kept them from divorcing outright, but it did not preclude periods of separation. In 1956, it seemed almost certain that they would finalize the divorce, only for them to reconcile at the last minute. Jeanne's mother, to whom she was occasionally close and occasionally estranged, was rumored to have exacerbated some of these tensions, pushing Brinkman's frustration to the breaking point. While film magazines tried to downplay the drama, more mainstream outlets seized on the story as an example of how even the girl-next-door starlets were not immune to scandal. In the midst of all this, She expanded her social and political interests. A devout Roman Catholic, she considered her faith non-negotiable, even as her personal troubles might have cast doubt on the practicality of certain church teachings about marriage. She was also a committed conservative. As the 1960s progressed, she became a vocal supporter of Richard Nixon, championing his political rise. She was rumored to have been one of Hollywood's so-called aides to Nixon, though the extent of this role remained hazy. In 1969, she and her family traveled to Washington, D.C., attending multiple inaugural balls to celebrate Nixon's ascendancy. Newspapers at the time mentioned sightings of Jeanne Crain or Jeanne Crain among the Republican elite, though cynics wondered if she had attached herself to the cause primarily for publicity. She insisted otherwise, emphasizing that her Catholic convictions aligned with conservative values. Regardless of motive, her presence in that circle stirred curiosity about how a woman best known for mild, sweet roles in the 1940s was now hobnobbing with major political influencers. Despite her turning into a self-declared conservative icon, her Hollywood reputation during her heyday was quite different. The press once dubbed her Hollywood's #1 party girl, referencing the dizzying schedule of social events she was invited to, some 200 a year by her own estimate. She explained that she simply could not attend them all. She tried to pick whichever ones seemed the most entertaining, and if a lavish soiree offered a chance to rub elbows with interesting personalities or support philanthropic causes, she would go. One grand event she attended with Brinkman was hosted by a Brazilian millionaire, Jorge Ginley, who was known for extravagant festivities. On that occasion, they ended up at the famed Ciro's, or perhaps the Mocambo, reports differ, dancing the night away. Loretta Young, the devout star of The Bishop's Wife, was also rumored to be at the same gathering, leading to an amusing collision of two famously religious yet socially adventurous actresses. As time went on, her film presence slowly waned, particularly after the mid-1950s. She did appear in a series of productions: Vicky, 1953, a crime drama that tested her ability to portray a complex character; Man Without a Star, 1955, opposite Kirk Douglas, a Western that required her to adopt a more rugged persona; The Fastest Gun Alive, 1956, Gentlemen Marry Brunettes, 1955, and so on. While some did fine at the box office, few recaptured the spotlight that once shone on her. She also dipped into roles outside the mainstream, such as Invasion 1700, also called Pontius Pilate, 1962, a historical epic that cast her in a setting far removed from American contemporary tales. Critics occasionally lamented that she had never quite followed up her Pinky triumph with another project equally daring. A minor highlight was Hot Rods to Hell, 1967, a cult favorite exploitation flick in which she played a suburban mother besieged by delinquent youths on the highway. But that film garnered more curiosity than acclaim. Her political entrenchment continued. By the late 1960s, she was evidently so devoted to the conservative cause that she found greater affinity among party circles than among the new breed of Hollywood liberals. She was not alone in that stance. There were plenty of conservative figures in the industry, but she was distinctly more vocal than her low-profile peers might have been. Part of her motivation, she explained, lay in her aversion to the counterculture movement, which she saw as undermining moral values. She disliked the era's open condemnation of traditional mores, feeling that her beliefs, Catholic, familial, patriotic, were increasingly under siege. Her personal life took another severe blow in the early 1990s when 2 of her 7 children died. One succumbed to chronic alcoholism, the other to a heroin overdose. For someone who had battled tension, rumor, and the near collapse of her marriage, these tragedies were on another level, leaving her emotionally shattered. Colleagues from the golden era of film sometimes noted that she never fully recovered from the loss, that her once easy sense of optimism gave way to a subdued acceptance of sorrow. She tried to make sense of it all within her faith, acknowledging that she placed her children's souls in God's hands, but privately she must have felt a dimension of heartbreak beyond expression. She was at this point mostly retired from acting. Her last notable credit was Skyjacked, 1972, a disaster film starring Charlton Heston. By then she had also moved away from the frantic swirl of film sets. Her husband Brinkman had become a successful businessman, giving them a measure of financial security that precluded the need for constant roles just to pay the bills. Outside of motion pictures, an intriguing facet of her life was her short foray into modeling. In 1941, she was discovered by a talent scout at the Max Reinhardt Playhouse, an experience that preceded her film career. By 1942, she had been named Camera Girl of 1942, which presumably recognized her photogenic qualities and potential as an on-screen figure. She appeared on the cover of Yank, the Army Weekly, in both 1944 and 1945, providing morale-boosting imagery for servicemen during World War II. By 1946, she graced the cover of Life magazine, an achievement that signaled her arrival in the ranks of top-tier American starlets. She was never a pinup in the mold of Betty Grable or Rita Hayworth, but she embodied a different type of wholesome attractiveness that resonated with large swaths of the public. Even more peculiar was her ownership of a pet lioness named Sasha, acquired during an era when Hollywood celebrities keeping exotic animals was not entirely unheard of. According to her statements to columnist Luella Parsons, she grew very fond of Sasha, insisting that the lioness had no mean traits. Yet the presence of a big cat in a domestic environment unnerved neighbors, especially with one or more babies in the house. She eventually had to relinquish Sasha to the Los Angeles Municipal Zoo, later known as the Griffith Park Zoo. It reportedly broke her heart, but she and Brinkman concluded the lion posed too great a safety risk. After the arrangement was finalized, she visited Sasha occasionally, accompanied by husband and children as though visiting a beloved family member. The press pounced on the story as further evidence of her eccentricities, though she downplayed it, remarking that it was simply a unique pet that, under different circumstances, would have remained part of the household. Through the 1960s and 1970s, she drifted from Hollywood's main stage. She made sporadic appearances, some cameo level, others small supporting roles. She found the changing mood of American cinema, grittier, more cynical, did not suit her well. She came from an era of studio control, star vehicles, and code-approved content. Now, the new Hollywood wave was embracing controversial themes, graphic violence, and freer depictions of sexuality. Directors rarely sought her out for these new styles of roles. She slipped almost imperceptibly into retirement, focusing on her children, her faith, and a quieter life. If she yearned for a comeback, she rarely discussed it publicly. In interviews, she typically spoke of cherishing the simpler times, acknowledging that the industry had moved on. As the years went by, her legacy among classic film fans took shape. She was remembered primarily for Pinky, State Fair, Margie, and a handful of other mid-century crowd pleasers. In 1950, for instance, a Roman Catholic group, the National Gaelic Athletic Association, named her the Best Actress of the Year, an accolade that underscored how she had become a sort of Catholic sweetheart, popular among religious viewers who appreciated her modest off-screen persona. Though she never won a major industry trophy, neither an Oscar, Golden Globe, nor a BAFTA, her single Academy Award nomination for Best Actress secured her place in the annals of Hollywood's recognized performers. She might have yearned privately for a golden statue on her mantle, but public statements from her typically exuded contentment about the path her career had taken. She eventually parted ways with the major studios, forging her own deals or taking cameo assignments. By the time the 1970s dawned, she was effectively finished with mainstream film. Aside from occasional cameo roles in pictures like Skyjacked, she did keep up relationships with friends from her heyday, though many had also receded from public view. The final years of her life were overshadowed by personal losses and the quiet rhythms of advanced age. Brinkman, with whom she had weathered so many storms, died in 2003. Despite all their near separations and public spats, they never legally divorced. Presumably, that was a testament to the power of her Catholic convictions, or possibly a testament to an unspoken abiding love that overcame repeated friction. Then, 2 months after Brinkman's death, Jeanne suffered a heart attack. The stress of losing her partner, combined with age and past burdens, likely contributed. She died in October 2003, closing out a life that had begun in a small California city nearly 8 decades before. She was interred at the Santa Barbara Cemetery, an unassuming final resting place for someone once dubbed Hollywood's #1 party girl. The cinematic legacy she left behind is collected in bits and pieces at archives like Wesleyan University in Connecticut, where publicist Charles Finley assembled a series of memorabilia reflecting her mid-century stardom. This includes publicity stills, magazine covers, and press kits, traces of an era that now feels distant to modern viewers. From these photographs and stories, one can reconstruct an image of a star who carefully balanced the studio-imposed veneer of sweet innocence with a lively, personal life. She was rumored, after all, to have attended a vast array of social gatherings, hobnobbed with celebrities, politicians, and millionaires, and even occasionally hopped into comedic stunts at parties. At the same time, she maintained an earnest sense of religiosity, championed a moral code that might have seemed out of step with Hollywood's more libertine corners, and refused to finalize a divorce that many said was warranted by Brinkman's alleged behavior. That tension between the devout Catholic and the public persona of a glamorous star seldom found resolution in her lifetime. Indeed, it might be that very tension that made her intriguing. Historically, Jeanne Crain's name is overshadowed by some of her contemporaries, Gene Tierney, Jennifer Jones, or Loretta Young, for instance. Yet to those who recall the swirl of 1940s and 1950s American cinema, she remains a luminous figure, anchored by at least one performance, Pinky, that stands out as groundbreaking for the era's conversation about race and identity. Her comedic roles in Margie and State Fair endure in the hearts of classic film buffs who find comfort in the nostalgic innocence these movies evoke. She never boasted the dramatic range or star wattage of, say, a Bette Davis or Katharine Hepburn, but she carved out her own niche, mixing an unforced sweetness with glimpses of inner depth. That said, she was not purely an on-screen ingenue. The press coverage about her private gatherings and her appetite for partying complicates the notion of her as merely a naive star. Also, the existence of that pet lioness, Sasha, reveals a genuine sense of adventure or eccentricity, something seldom associated with images of a demure ingenue, and her unwavering stance in Republican and Catholic circles highlights a steeliness that might surprise those who who only watched her wide-eyed characters. In truth, she seems to have been a woman of many contradictions. A devout Catholic who was rumored to party with millionaires, a mother of 7 who kept a lion in her home, a conservative stalwart in an industry often leaning left, and a star who never felt the need to chase bigger accolades after a certain point in her career. Even the matter of her official name has caused small confusions in film histories. Born Jeanne Elizabeth Crain, spelled with one N in her birth surname, she would become widely known as Jeanne Crain, spelled with 2 N's in Jeanne but 1 in Crain, though in some documents it's spelled Crain. Periodically, fans see reference to Jeanne Crain on older magazine covers or in certain early records, while most official film credits say Jeanne Crain. She was consistent about the film billing, but her personal documents varied. In discussing her oeuvre, many highlight not just Pinky, but also Cheaper by the Dozen, 1950, in which she played the eldest daughter of Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, a comedic family dynamic that resonated widely. Then in the sequel, Bells on Their Toes, 1952, she reprised that role. These were lighter fare, bridging the gap between the comedic innocence of her early career and the maternal roles that might have paralleled her real life as she advanced in the age. She also starred in You Were Meant for Me, 1948, a film about the big band era featuring Dan Dailey, as well as Centennial Summer, 1946, a period musical that continued to capitalize on her youthful exuberance. Critics never universally crowned her as a top-tier star, but the studios recognized that she was a reliable box office draw for these mid-range musicals and light dramas. She might have been overshadowed by bigger names, but she maintained steady work for nearly 2 decades, an accomplishment in an industry that churned through starlets at a rapid clip. An interesting tidbit is that at one point she was recognized by the Gaelic Athletic Association as the Best Actress of 1950. This was an unusual prize for a Hollywood star, reflecting perhaps her Catholic affiliation or some Irish-American solidarity. She graciously accepted, acknowledging her proud Irish heritage. The moment underscores how varied her fan base was, not confined to the usual Hollywood buzz. She resonated with religious and ethnic communities who admired her seemingly wholesome image. Reports also emerged that she wanted to try more challenging roles. She was frustrated at times that studios repeatedly typecast her as the sweet small-town girl, given that she had proven with Pinky that she could handle heavier subject matter. She had glimpses of more tension-filled scripts, such as Vicky, where she portrayed a model ensnared in a murder investigation, or The Tattered Dress, 1957, an intense legal drama. Still, one senses that she never entirely escaped the gravitational pull of her earlier ingenue brand, possibly because the mid-century studio system was so adept at pigeonholing. By the dawn of the 1960s, the entire industry was changing. TV was on the rise, the star system was fragmenting, and new waves of method acting overshadowed the classical style. Jeanne was thus a product of a transitional period, a star whose prime might have been extended in an earlier era, but who found fewer roles that spoke to the evolving tastes of the 1960s and 1970s. When she eventually withdrew from film, she found partial refuge in hosting or attending philanthropic events. She valued family gatherings, though heartbreak remained. 2 of her children's untimely deaths in the 1990s, a tragedy that cut her to the core, ended any illusions she might have had about escaping sorrow. She rarely spoke about it publicly, though certain acquaintances said she retreated once more into her faith. Yet those who encountered her in these later years mention a quiet warmth. She might have felt battered by life, but she hadn't lost her kindness. She was known to write personal letters to fans who had followed her since the 1940s, surprising them with heartfelt notes. Some older fans recall receiving signed photos accompanied by an almost grandmotherly tone, as though she treasured these last connections to the era of her stardom. Slight confusion arises about her final cameo roles. The 1972 film Skyjacked, starring Charlton Heston and directed by John Guillermin, is often cited as her official farewell to big-screen appearances, though she might have done minor TV spots or uncredited roles after that. Regardless, by the mid-1970s, she had fully stepped away, devoting her energy to personal matters and occasional public appearances at conservative fundraising events. She never engaged in the revival circuits or the wave of cameo-laden nostalgia TV programs that some older stars embraced. Looking at her politics, some might wonder if her stance hampered her later career. She was, after all, outspoken about endorsing Nixon, and the late 1960s and early 1970s were times of heated political divides. Many prominent directors and casting agents leaned liberal, possibly viewing her as an ideological outlier. Yet whether that concretely affected her job opportunities is speculative. Hollywood is full of intangible factors that shape who gets cast. She herself never blamed her politics for diminishing offers. She generally ascribed it to changing tastes. But the stories of her personal life, pet lion, frequent partying, Catholic convictions, rumored spats with her mother, these keep her intriguing to historians. Contradictions abound, which might be the hallmark of many Golden Age Hollywood luminaries. The squeaky clean star who might have had a taste for wild social events. The devout Catholic who possessed a pet lioness at home. The actress who soared to an Oscar nomination, yet apparently sidestepped further challenging roles. Above all, one sees a figure whose public image was anchored in a particular brand of 1940s innocence, yet whose private life was layered with complexity and sorrow. She died of a heart attack in October 2003, just 2 months after Brinkman passed away, leaving behind 5 surviving children, grandchildren, and a legacy scattered among film reels, press clippings, and the memories of fans who recall that sweet, earnest face on the silver screen. True devotees can locate memorabilia at Wesleyan University's cinema archives. They can also trace her footprints across old fan magazines, those ephemeral documents of an era when film stars occupied an exalted place in the American imagination. In the final analysis, Jeanne's life encompassed so much more than the single highlight of Pinky. She was a model, an ice skater, a teen pageant winner. She carved out a real career with comedic musicals, family dramas, and occasional forays into thriller or noir territory, forging a body of work that, while lacking major awards, still resonates with classic film aficionados. She was a mother of 7 who confronted heartbreak within her own family. She harbored strong religious beliefs and fervent political loyalties. She was by turns a rumored party girl and a devout conservative. She had a flair for collecting improbable experiences, like adopting a lioness, that stand in stark contrast to her outwardly conventional star image. In short, she was irreducible to any single label, not simply the girl next door, not merely the Hollywood party queen, and not wholly the devout Catholic who never divorced. She was a dynamic, multifaceted individual shaped by the collisions of her era, an era that forced many starlets to navigate contradictory pressures of morality, glamour, tradition, and modern ambition. For those discovering her in the present day, it can be surprising to learn about the swirl of stories that define her. One might watch State Fair or Margie and see her luminous charm, then find Pinky and marvel at the social commentary. One might then read up on her real life and discover her Catholic devotion, her unwavering stance on staying married, or her cameo appearances with lion cubs. It's that tapestry that makes her memory endure, because she was never simple or one-dimensional. The studios may have tried to market her as a sweet comedic star, or as the blossoming actress who tackled a single groundbreaking role, but in truth, she was a woman of many contradictions living behind that golden era facade. Hence, when asked about one's favorite Jeanne Crain film, answers often vary. Some are partial to Pinky for its gravity, some love the cheerful innocence of Margie, and others find her best self in comedic musicals. A few dig deeper, appreciating her later pictures like Vicky or The Tattered Dress, glimpsing a more mature aura. She never quite cultivated the overshadowing mystique of legends like Bette Davis or Joan Crawford, yet she remains a reference point for a generation of filmgoers who found her presence heartwarming. And so the question about the best film remains open, inviting fans and historians to re-watch her filmography, scanning for nuances that reflect her personal complexity. The mention of her membership in the Republican Party and her visits to the White House in 1969 further underscores her unexpected bridging of show business and politics. In the spirit of that time, with Ronald Reagan having already made a name for himself as a conservative political figure out of Hollywood, it wasn't inconceivable that stars like Jeanne might share similar beliefs. But the thoroughness of her involvement, attending multiple inaugural balls, rumored to counsel or represent Nixon's Hollywood ties, elevated her beyond mere passive endorsement. She reaped social capital among conservative circles, but the film community might have found her stances perplexing. If she had sought to produce or direct at that time, it's unclear whether her connections or her politics would have helped or hindered. By all appearances, though, she had largely stepped away from active stardom by then, focusing instead on her family and personal convictions. An additional footnote is how she influenced younger actresses who admired her quiet resilience and the calm, steady approach to roles. While many starlets were known for flamboyant public romances or career intrigues, Jeanne kept her deeper struggles somewhat private, even if rumors abounded. A few starlets in the 1950s reportedly told interviewers that they admired how she handled the Hollywood system without becoming hardened. In a business rife with cynicism, they saw her as an example of a woman who, though embroiled in personal drama, tried to maintain good humor and courtesy on set. To conjure an image, perhaps in a corner of 1950s Hollywood, at some studio function, you might have spotted Jeanne Crain smiling graciously, chatting with directors or fellow actors, quietly leaving earlier than the others because she needed to get home to her children. Then on a different night, she might appear at a lavish party, glammed up, dancing with her husband or greeting friends at a grand table. Meanwhile, studio publicists might weave a narrative about her sweetness, ignoring the real marital discord or the feuds with her mother. And beneath the surface, a devout Catholic woman wrestled with how to remain faithful to the vow she had made, even if her husband's actions or her own rumored infidelities occasionally threatened the bond. The press usually stuck to simpler angles, branding her Hollywood's #1 party girl or extolling her as an all-American star. Only in the 21st century, with retrospective vantage, do we see the contradictions in fuller color. She is often overshadowed by bigger names from her era in discussions of classic Hollywood. Yet many fans of mid-century cinema rank her among the beloved second-tier leading ladies, who might, on a given project, display star power equal to the top. She never aspired to transform herself into a scandal-driven icon, nor did she aim for the unconventional roles that could have propelled her to multiple Oscar nominations. Instead, she sought a fairly consistent path, occasionally stepping outside the mold, as with Pinky, to remind critics that she was no mere lightweight. But the wealth of normalcy she craved, stable marriage, big family, devout faith, proved elusive, riddled with heartbreak, controversy, and tragedy. She pressed on, buoyed by a sense of duty to her children and a religious conviction about the sanctity of marriage, all while forging a modest, low-key post-Hollywood existence once her star had dimmed. Her passing in October 2003, so close on the heels of Brinkman's demise, might be read as a final testament to their bond. Despite everything, they had spent more than half a century together with a brood of 7, some of whom preceded them in death. The heartbreak of the early 1990s lost them 2 children to substance abuse. The Catholic funeral rites for her and Brinkman likely brought together a small circle of old Hollywood acquaintances, family, and longtime fans, all mourning not just the end of a star's life, but the conclusion of an entire generational story. At Santa Barbara Cemetery, her tomb stands as a quiet marker, often visited by a handful of dedicated admirers or by film historians who have grown fascinated by her story. In contemporary times, whenever someone stumbles upon State Fair or Pinky on a classic film channel, they might do a quick search of her name online, discovering tidbits about the lioness Sasha, the rumored extravagances, the Oscar nomination, the mother who strongly opposed her marriage, the heated conflict with Brinkman, or her unwavering conservatism. The resulting portrait can feel disjointed. An actress who soared on screen in the 1940s, dabbled in comedic musicals, took a major risk with a film about race, navigated a messy personal life, ended up a conservative Catholic activist, and eventually receded from the limelight. Yet in that disjointedness lies a certain grandeur. She lived multiple arcs, each with its own moral complexities and emotional stakes. No single role or biography can capture her fully. The tension between public illusions and private truths was emblematic of the studio era. She exemplified the best and worst aspects of that system. The sense of star-making magic that turned a teenage ice skater into an Academy Award nominee, and the relentless pressure that demanded squeaky clean images while personal turmoil festered behind the scenes. Her fans remain enthusiastic. Some collect magazines and press photos from her heyday, ogling the glam dresses she wore to galas or the unwavering smile she flashed on red carpets. Others appreciate that behind the scenes she struggled, changed, adapted, and sometimes stumbled. For those who want a deeper connection, a visit to the cinema archives at Wesleyan University might be in order, where one can see clippings, stills, and letters that shed light on her career. Possibly, one might even glimpse aspects of her personality that never made it into the public domain, and so she continues to speak to us across decades of cinematic history, a figure whose essence is wrapped in a mixture of innocence, ambition, vulnerability, devoutness, and a quest for normalcy that never quite arrived. If asked about a favorite film, she might have graciously suggested Pinky, acknowledging its social resonance. But in her final years, she might also have singled out simpler musicals or comedies, reminding us that she took joy in comedic lightness as well. That duality was her hallmark, bridging seriousness and levity, personal heartbreak and radiant public presence. Even at the tail end of her career, she occasionally turned up at events celebrating old Hollywood. People who met her in these contexts recall her gentle handshake and soft-spoken conversation, as if no trace remained of the #1 party girl moniker. She might have aged, but she had not lost the fundamental courtesy that charmed audiences decades earlier. She was known to greet individuals of all backgrounds, with the same genial politeness, never cutting them off or ignoring them. Some fans described her as quietly luminous, lacking the brassy outspokenness of other older stars who tried to remain in the headlines. If anything, she seemed content with her quieter role, satisfied to let the new generation of celebrities chase the limelight. In the end, it's fair to say that Jeanne's life is one of those Hollywood stories that, while lacking a simple triumphant arc, offers a portrait of how fame, faith, family, heartbreak, and resilience can intersect. She neither crashed nor soared to unprecedented heights. She lived somewhere in between, forging her own path but also shaped by forces outside her control. Her family's tragedies marred her later years, but she kept her moral convictions, staying married until Brinkman's death, abiding by a conservative worldview that might puzzle modern onlookers, but that anchored her sense of identity. She was equally at home partying in glitzy LA clubs or attending White House inaugural balls, yet she also believed deeply in the sanctity of private devotion and family dinners. That contradiction remains unresolved, but it gave her a uniquely human dimension that resonates across time. Thus, whenever an old clip of Margie or Cheaper by the Dozen surfaces, or whenever Pinky is studied in film classes about race representation, one might pause to recall the woman behind the role, an actress discovered as a teenage ice skater, tested by Orson Welles, extolled by 20th Century Fox, thrown into social storms with a party girl reputation, rumored to keep a lioness in her backyard, mother to 7 children, 2 of whom she lost far too early, unwavering in her Catholic commitment, supportive of Nixon in a swirl of Hollywood liberalism, plagued by accusations of spousal friction, yet abiding with Brinkman until the bitter end. She died within 2 months of him, a final note of intertwined destinies. That multifaceted tale, part luminous stardom, part raw personal struggle, cements her memory in the pantheon of Golden Age Hollywood, a place where illusions swirl with truth and contradiction is the norm. So when asked to pick a favorite Jeanne Crain film or share a memory of her persona, it might be wise to consider all these layers. Maybe you enjoy her carefree comedic roles. Maybe you appreciate the groundbreaking seriousness of Pinky. Maybe you find it tragic that she never attained the wide critical praise she deserved. Or perhaps you admire her for forging a genuine life path, a mother who refused to break her vows, a woman who found joy in baby lion cubs, a star who attended hundreds of parties but never lost her sense of self. Even the final question about the best film can be overshadowed by the complicated tapestry of who she was. And that tapestry, woven from nearly 8 decades of living, remains the true testament to a star who at times stepped into the limelight and at others withdrew into the shadows of her own convictions, forging one of Hollywood's more intricate personal journeys.